feeling of fear has been around since the dawn of man. It's an ingrained and primitive human feeling that involves an individual emotion and universal biochemical response. Fear is used to keep us aware of any physical or psychological danger. Humans have also harnessed this emotion to keep order and establish rule. Even though this emotion is as ancient as early humans, we also get these feelings every day. You may get fearful if you have a huge homework assignment that's due date is creeping up, or that uneasy feeling you have when walking down a dark street and you see a stranger walking in your direction. That feeling of fear has been expressed in different forms of media for centuries. Books like Dante's Inferno and classics like Dracula or Frankenstein. In television, you see shows such as American Horror Story and Stranger Things. Also movies like Scream, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Halloween, where you root for your favorite protagonists around the door and not up the stairs. It would only make sense if this form of media would eventually make its way to video games, which is why I wanted to create this video in the first place. Welcome back to Great Scott Gaming, and in this video I will be looking at what makes a video game truly terrifying. I don't want to get too far into the history of horror gaming, but we'll link a video below of the evolution of horror gaming over the decades, which I found pretty interesting. Here's some of the games I'll be talking about in today's video. You have been warned. However, with everything said, let's get into it. Anticipation and suspense seem very similar, but in reality are both unique and present a different importance to horror games. Suspense is the narrative structure the writers and developers use to build a story. This is that same graph we were all shown in school, where it shows setting the scene, or exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then the resolution. This way of writing is used over a whole story, or used as quick instances that are part of the main narrative structure. Anticipation is a feeling and psychological effect we gamers get when experiencing both these instances and overall story narrative. There is no feeling of horror unless we players have the feeling of anticipation, and there's usually no anticipation without the writers and developers creating that suspenseful narrative. Also, all the points that I will discuss later on in this video are used as tools to help create these scenes. Let's look at a great example of this. Everyone knows the Outlast series. You know, the hide or die survival horror game with its most infamous variant antagonist that seems obsessed with little pigs and looks like he had too many pieces of bacon? Yep, that guy. This game does a great job of both building up suspense and anticipation for the player. The example I want to use is a lead up and climax of your first encounter with Chris Walker, the pig guy we just talked about. You get thrown into a world where you are a freelance investigative journalist named Miles Upshur, who decides to analyze and case a remote psychiatric hospital named Mount Massive Asylum, located deep within the mountains of Lake County, Colorado. You drive up on a dark and eerily quiet night in the first-person view of Miles. Everything is unknown to you, and the atmosphere is spooky. After you finally Assassin's Creed yourself up into the asylum, you have to traverse your way through the decrepit and mysterious floors of the asylum as you try to piece together what happened here. Slowly the buildup happens with puzzling notes found by Miles, strange noises constantly going on around you, bloody footprints leading to a bathroom, and in that bathroom an open air vent with blood dripping from it. As you crawl in the air duct, an unknown man busts through the door, letting you know you are not alone. And as you exit, you make your way to a pitch black, closed room with bodies on the floor and hanging from the ceiling. You make your way to another unknown character impaled by a pipe who lets you know,
"You can't fight them. You have to hide. Can unlock the main doors from security and control. You have to get the fuck out of this terrible place."
You exit the room and see a hulking figure walking in the direction you need to go. As you finally get the courage to sneak by the door, you think you're safe as you try to squeeze past some bookshelves, when finally you hear,
"Little pig,"
and are thrown to the floor below. He is constantly in the background as you explore the asylum, sometimes letting you watch from afar, but sometimes he is watching you, and you have to run and hide to escape his nearing grasp. Isn't that such a cool way to not only open up a story, but introduce a character? I think this opening is a great showcase of many of the examples I would be listing below, but overall does a great job of showcasing how to build suspense correctly to almost guarantee your player has the feelings of anticipation, which leads to that feeling of fear as the horror elements start rising. Subverting your expectation is also a great tool for writers and developers to use to build suspense. As you become more familiar with horror tropes in video games, you start to pick up on some tells that the developers are trying to set up for the player. For example, you're playing a zombie game, and you walk up to a dead body. Underneath the body is whatever important item you need to grab to advance your mission. You flip it over and jump scare. You eventually start to pick up on these tropes the more horror games you play, which goes the same for moviegoers, as they watch more horror films. So to get around this, writers and developers use your previous knowledge either from other games or a situation they put you in earlier within their own story to subvert your expectations to get that scare. The best example that I can think of, that I'm sure everyone knows of, is the original jump scare in Resident Evil when the dog breaks through the window. Let's set the scene. You're playing Resident Evil for the first time back in the 90s. As you're playing, you walk down an empty hallway when all of a sudden a rabid dog breaks through a window, rushing to you on its way to munch your ankles. As you run down the corridor, more and more dogs pour in as you rush to get to the other door alive. This was the first big jump scare a lot of people remember in gaming. The writers and developers of the remake worked with former knowledge the players had and subverted the expectations of the players as they got to the same encounter. Reset that scene as you walk down the same corridor, but this time with HD textures. As you pass by that same window and are clenching your you-know-what, all that happens is a little cracking sound on the window and you get to walk by scot-free. When you come back through the corridor, however, out pops that same dog pack, ready to nip at your ankles. A lot of players were not expecting that a second time around. Both these games mentioned also does a great job at making your character feel vulnerable. It is even stated point blank to you by the impaled fella you encounter in Outlast before meeting Chris Walker. This of course leads me to my next point of creating good horror in video games, making the playable character feel vulnerable. Making the playable character feel vulnerable is huge when it comes to making horror games. We all remember Resident Evil 6 and the questionable direction it took to make the game more action-packed. This direction made what was previously a scary game not, because you're pretty much almost a superhero, taking out hordes of zombies with just your fists and fighting a giant mutated human that turned into a T-Rex, to name a couple. Now yes, Resident Evil 4 and 5 started going in this direction, but Resident Evil 6 took that action element of the game and made it the main focus for their game. For some reason, some people said this version of Resident Evil sucked major giraffe dick, but I'm not sure where they got that idea from. Anyways, making your main character feel vulnerable is essential for horror games, as it is one of the elements that help you empathize with the character and understand they are never truly safe. It can be used momentarily as well to help build horror in even non-horror games. Having a vulnerable character also brings feelings of helplessness and anxiety. So how about a couple examples of this? Well, sticking with the Resident Evil theme, the original Resident Evil did a great job of making you feel vulnerable even though you were able to fight back. Why was this? Well, it all comes down to scarcity. In the game, you were not able to save whenever you wanted to, meaning if you made a mistake, you could have real life consequences. You had to make tough choices with not only item management as your inventory was as big as a hand purse, but also be selective on when to shoot, what to kill, and when to heal, as every helpful item you ran across was few and far between. Other games took it to an even more extreme level by almost or completely taking the ability away from the player to fight back, while also giving the playable character limited resources and making them feel isolated. A recent game that comes to my mind that does this best is Alien Isolation. In this game, our original understanding of the monsters from Aliens go out the window. In the movies, what we see is definitely horror, but we also see a group of Marines fighting back against many aliens that have infiltrated the ship. In the game iteration of the movie, Alien Isolation, you play as Amanda Ripley, who is investigating the disappearance of her mother, the one and only Ellen Ripley, while trying to outplay and outsmart a single alien. Yep, you heard me right, only one alien. This game puts an emphasis on stealth and survival horror, while making the player feel vulnerable by being able to die at any moment if they get detected, further increasing the anxiety as well. An older game such as the original Clock Tower that came out in 1995 is still terrifying because of that feeling of vulnerability and helplessness. It's a survival horror point-and-click adventure game where you play as a young orphan named Jennifer Simpson. She is forced to explore and find a way to escape the Barrows mansion after finding out another one of the children living there was murdered. This makes you as a player feel isolated, which alone can bring on that fear of vulnerability. On top of that, the whole game you're being stalked by the game's antagonist, Scissorman, and you must do your best at evading him because if he catches you, it's game over. Lastly, both Evil Within and Evil Within 2 are great examples where an arguably strong character is occasionally put in situations where he is powerless, immediately throwing that person controlling him into a state of fear and panic. After the initial opening of Evil Within, Sebastian Castellanos, the playable character you'll be controlling over both titles, is visibly hurt as he limps around trying to avoid a sadist that wields a chainsaw chasing him in an unknown place. Evil Within 2, which in my opinion is a superior game, has a reoccurring enemy named Anima. You find multiple logs and diary entries in the town before initially seeing her. They suggest you pick her targets randomly, following and tormenting them for some time until they finally cave in from paranoia, or she decides to kill them herself. For any of you who have played this game, you know just how terrifying these encounters can be as you try to sneak past her and not get snatched up. Also, I apparently had a unique encounter with her where I was basically cornered into a small shack with only one way out. Did any of you guys ever run across a specific encounter? However, with all this stated, you cannot just have a vulnerable character in your video game and nothing else, as many players can just put down the controller if they are not interested, killing that anticipation built up and negating the gameplay experience. What you need is buy-in and immersion, and nothing does this better than atmosphere. We all have heard that horror movies aren't that scary with the sound off. Of course, the visuals can be gruesome, but a lot of the time it's the actual sound itself that is the scariest. This is also the same for video games. There are other stimuli that increase the terror of the atmosphere, such as visuals and exposition, which I'll get into a bit, but sound design is the most important in building atmosphere. I also want to go on a quick tangent to explain a concept called priming, and how it relates to sound design, visuals, and exposition of atmosphere, because it's what tricks our brains to being scared in the first place. According to writer Maral Taherian from Gama Sutra, priming psychology is defined as the effect in which the response to a stimulus is influenced by the exposure to a previous stimulus. Consider the word stem completion task, for example. Here, a test subject is exposed to certain words, one of which is the word lettuce. He or she is then asked to complete the following word. The effect of priming can be seen when the subject fills the blank with "tus" due to the fact that he or she was exposed to that word earlier in the experiment. The writer also uses a great point using the game Amnesia to back her claim. She states, "Several games rely heavily on creating anxiety using this strategy, by using sounds that remind players of an encroaching yet unseen enemy. In Amnesia, visits to various torture chambers where he actually hears victims with an Iron Maiden and Brazen Bull leads up to the playable character being locked in a cell themselves. The fact that such priming took place, being exposed to the torture scenes before, clearly influences the way the player feels when he himself is locked up, dreading the possibility of similar tortures." Interesting, right? Keep this in mind as I dive deeper into the three main aspects of building atmosphere. This concept does not just have to pull from the source material to prime you as a player. If you have a natural fear of the dark, for example, that could prime you to be scared just from real life experiences alone. To start off with what I feel is the backbone of the three pillars of building atmosphere, let's dive into sound design. Let me show you an example of a scary scene that instantly becomes less terrifying by altering the sound. Remember that scene with Anime I just showed you? Crazy how something that was having me freak out while playing the game suddenly becomes funny. But what is an example of flawless sound design in a horror game? Well, let me first be honest. I've been seeing all over the internet that Silent Hill 2 has amazing sound design, but I never played it and wouldn't be able to give a genuine dive into the material. But I will include a link to the sound design of that game in the description below. However, a game that has amazing sound design, and that I actually have played, is Dead Space. In the opening of the game, when everything starts escalating, you have an alarm start ringing, alerting the player that something is wrong, and then you start hearing banging in the vents above you. Take a look.
What the hell was that?
Automatic quarantine must have tripped when the filtration system restarted. Everybody relax. Not sure.
What the hell? I don't know. Something's in the room with us.
Jesus! Open fire! Open fire! Get up! Power! Get up!
Come on. Got it!
Isaac! Get the hell out of there!
The door's unlocked!
As you're running away from these necromorphs, everything around you starts getting more hectic, and you even hear the terrifying screeches of the monsters themselves. As mentioned earlier though, atmosphere is established with more than just sound design. It is the most important from building atmosphere, but visuals and exposition are also very important. On top of that, these three pillars build up the fear of the unknown until you get to the climax the developers and writers intended. I think there's definitely an argument of visual horror versus fear of the unknown, debating which is truly more scary. Both of these are elevated in horror from sound design and exposition. If you think about it for a bit though, imagine a scary monster from your favorite horror film. Were you more scared when they gave you glimpses of the monster, or when it was fully revealed? Most monsters that are teased throughout the film aren't even that scary when finally shown to the audience. Usually what we had imagined in our heads is a lot scarier than the CGI or makeup effects the artist could conjure up. Visual horror can be more than just the monsters or creatures on screen, however, and even help improve our fear of the unknown. A good example of this in video gaming is the scene I showed earlier in Outlast. The scene is where you have nowhere to go but to follow the bloody footprints leading to an unexplored bathroom. In that bathroom, a half-open air vent is present, with blood dripping from it, again leading to an unknown area. We as players know we are playing a scary game, but also know it's only a matter of time before we finally see what did this. We start making up ideas in our head about what actually might happen here until we finally see it ourselves. That primes us perfectly for video game developers to scare us, but fear of the unknown is unfortunately a big reason why you as a gamer will never get that true first-time experience again since you know what to expect. Bioshock is a great example of building up both visual and exposition atmosphere. I know it is not necessarily considered a horror game, but it is seen as a spiritual successor to System Shock, so I'm going to run with it. I want to look specifically at the opening of the game, because it does a great job of building up a terrifying atmosphere in such a short period of time. In the opening scene, our protagonist Jack crash lands from a plane in the middle of the ocean, immediately making you feel isolated as you're the only survivor. Fire surrounds you from the crash, being one of your only points of light on the dark waters. You then end up finding the terminus that leads you miles below the surface. On the way down, you see cryptic messages, and get told some exposition from a mysterious character describing what you're about to see, the underwater utopian city, Rapture. As you get closer to the final destination, you hear another unknown character speaking to another NPC stating,
You best get over there, and be quick about it. The splicers are coming.
Then as you get your initial view inside the actual city, it doesn't match the serene landscape that you just saw. It's dark and all you can see is this.
Just don't hurt me. Just let me go. Just my gun.
Is it someone new?
As you can see, this gets you primed and ready for the story ahead. It sets up the world, then puts it on its head immediately, both with the visual horror in the beginning and at the end, and the exposition given, all to help make the player experience more impactful. Some single examples of exposition building atmosphere would be what I mentioned earlier, like the patient notes in Outlast, or the documents in hinting Anima in Evil Within 2. For visual horror, I like the example YouTuber FoxKid uses when he mentions the first time you see the Gaping Dragon in Dark Souls. It's a monstrous looking boss that isn't like anything else you've seen before in the game thus far. I know my first feeling was to get as far away from this thing as possible. With everything discussed in this video, I think it gives us a good understanding of what makes video games scary. But what do you guys think? What other reasons do you think makes video games scary? What games have you played that scared you the most? If you like this video, look out for my part 2 where I look at some video games that aren't considered horror, but how they use it to better their games. Please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell if you want to stay updated on my latest releases. See you next video. Peace.